Hey everyone, it's Denise with Liquid Color, and today I am super excited. I just got a package in the mail. I knew it was coming, but that doesn't mean I'm any less thrilled, excited, and appreciative. One of my viewers, Alan, that lives over in the UK, wanted to buy one of the items on my wish list for me. And this is a palette that I have been coveting for quite some time, so it is here, and I'm going to open the package with you. I don't even think I can get this all in the frame, but here we go. Lots of bubble wrap. Got a big, heavy box inside. Alright, so here is the package from inside. It's fairly substantial. I think it probably weighs a little over 5 pounds. I'm not in my normal art space just because the packing box was so large. I'm on my living room table right now. Oh, it's so pretty. This is the 30 palette well from Cheap Joe's. Jackson also makes one that's like this. Has a pretty substantially heavy plastic lid. I think you can use these extra areas for mixing if you wanted to, but the whole reason I wanted this palette was so I could mix on porcelain and not on plastic or metal. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it a bit better. Alright, so this is the palette. It is from American Journey. There's like an unfinished porcelain surface on the back, or ceramic surface. And if I did my math right, I've got 7 full-size wells on each of the long sides and 4 full-size wells on the short sides, with 8 wells total on the corner pieces. This palette is available through Cheap Joe's, and that's where this one came from, but there's also a very similar palette that's available through Jackson's, and as far as I know, those are the only 2 places in the US that you can acquire them from. So I am just so thankful. Thank you, Alan, for sending this to me. I'll put a link to his Instagram in the description below here. He's a wonderful artist as well, and I'm so grateful. If you've been following me on Instagram, you know that I have been planning my colors for this palette for, I think, months. I was planning colors before I even acquired or had plans to acquire this, and I've been fine-tuning it over the last couple of weeks. And so let's go ahead, take it back to my art table and get it filled up. Alright everyone, so here I am laying out all of my swatch cards. Like I mentioned, you can see pictures of different iterations of my palette on Instagram. I've been planning this for quite some time. It's gone through a lot of different iterations, and this is what I finally decided on for my palette. Now these first couple of tubes that I'm going to show you are some of the more used brands in my palette. First I have a Schmincke Titanium Gold Ochre, followed by a Daniel Smith Lemon Yellow. This is a new color for me. I got it after I finished off my Hansa Yellow, after the Hansa Yellow Spotlight. It's PY175, not PY3 like other lemon yellows, and I am just in love with this color. It is really transparent and really gorgeous, and I can't wait to use it more often. Then we've got Mission Gold's Permanent Yellow Light, which is PY154. I'm a big fan of that one, followed by Daniel Smith's Hansa Yellow Deep, and a catastrophe is about to strike in 3, 2, 1. Ouch, that hurt. It made me so sad when it happened. I actually exclaimed out loud, and what had happened is I was trying to squeeze the paint from the end of the tube, and my hand slipped, and when I pushed in the top of the lid, it just kind of splattered everywhere. So it took me a little while to clean it up, and then I was able to move on. But sadly, I did waste a fair amount of paint from the cleanup. I also got transparent Pyrrol Orange recently. I haven't gotten to paint with it much other than swatch cards. That's Daniel Smith. followed by Pyrrol Red from Daniel Smith as well. Now that's the first tube that I use, the Pyrrol Red. That is a 5 milliliter tube, and as you can probably tell, I could barely fill the palette well with it. These wells are massive. I think that comfortably they hold at least 8 milliliters, and I think you could fit 10 milliliters in there if you really, really wanted to. In a little bit, you're going to see me try and squeeze out the Van Gogh. That's the other small tube in the bottom right-hand corner, and almost the entire 10 milliliter brand new tube fits in that well. Right now I'm working on my Carmine, trying to get that all out of the package. I'm using a pair of very sharp plier-like tools. I don't know what the official name for it is. I would normally use a flat nose plier, and I definitely recommend that you use a flat nose plier and not something with edges on it, but I couldn't find mine, so in the interest of time I use this one that has sharp edges and that can cut through paint tubes, so be very, very careful if you choose to go that route or you'll make a bigger mess. What I'm using them for is that when I get to the end of a tube, I fold over the kind of wider part that holds the nozzle, and I am crimping it to get all the last paint out that I can after I've completely squeezed the tube. Now, I apologize right now that this video is not going to be a beautiful, pretty swatching video of my dreams, because I had so many tubes that were half full, but I still had to squeeze them all out in their entirety to fit them into these palette wells. If you would like to have a beautiful filling experience, I would recommend starting with brand new tubes of 10 or 15 milliliters, and your job will be much, much easier. This whole process took me about an hour, and my thumbs were actually somewhat bruised afterwards because of how much squeezing I was doing. You can get a metal key tube that you can use to crimp out the last bit of the paint, but I did not have one on hand, so I used a combination of my fingers, a flat tool like a toothpick to squeeze all the paint out of the main part of the tube, and then the pliers to smush the last little bit out as well. So I've missed a couple colors while I was telling you all of that. We've got the Van Gogh Quinacridone Rose, the Rembrandt Permanent Red Violet, Daniel Smith's Rose of Ultramarine, Winsor Newton's Windsor Violet, which is dioxazine violet, French Ultramarine by Daniel Smith, Prussian Blue by M. Graham, Phthalo Blue by Daniel Smith, that is the blue shade, not the red shade. And then in that last well, to catch up, that is Daniel Smith's Phthalo Turquoise. Alright, so in this well, I actually have Amazonite Genuine and Turner's Turquoise. Now, it feels a little bit like a sin to mix together a Permatech color with a very cheap professional grade paint like Turner. Not that there's anything wrong with Turner, it's just, it's a Permatech paint. However, I did a lot of research on kind of a turquoisey teal color. I have Daniel Smith's Cobalt Teal Stick, but it granulates a little bit too much for my liking. Cobalt colors in general are really expensive to purchase, and so I actually found this Amazon Genuine that I wanted to try out, but when I got it, it actually turned out to be incredibly similar to Daniel Smith's Phthalo Green. It's just a weaker kind of version of that. It's a tiny bit more blue, and so I thought, you know, this is really close. I don't want them both in my palette, but I have this Turner Turquoise that would be able to lift that color up just a little bit to make it a nice, beautiful, kind of an aqua teal color. So that's what I did there. All right, so the next well is that Phthalo Green blue shade by Daniel Smith, and this one was probably, the next one was probably the saddest one for me. This is Daniel Smith's Sap Green, and it's an old tube. It had quinacridone gold in it, and they don't make this formulation like this anymore. It is PO49 and PG7, so I could mix it with my Phthalo Green and my quinacridone gold, and I might try and do that in the future because this was the last little bit that I had, and I didn't know that they had canceled it before they ran out, and I don't know where to find it anymore. After the Sap Green, I have Green Apatite Genuine, which is another Daniel Smith Permatech color. This one is kind of a mid-mossy green that has a brown granulation that separates out of it when it dries. It's really great for landscapes. followed by my Pyrrol green, which if you've seen my videos recently, you know I've kind of fallen in love with the mixing properties of this paint, and my Phthalo Blue, another staple in my dark paint collection. So if you're wondering why I have kind of like this hodgepodge of darker colors on this top left-hand corner, I know there's a green, a blue, and a purple that aren't necessarily blacks or browns, but I use them all for my dark mixing, so they're all together for that purpose. We've got Neutral Tint from Daniel Smith, which is a mixture of black, phthalo blue, and PV19, which is the quinacridone rose-ish type family. Then I have one of my little baby tubes of Schminke of my Pyrrol Violet, and you'll notice that there's hardly any in that well. I had filled one other half pan with that tube, and then that was all that was left, so I'll need to get more of that. Alright, now the next color is a bit controversial, and people on Instagram are questioning why I even wanted to have it in my palette. It's a convenience mixture of 3 different pigments, and it's called Burnt Umber. It's from Mission Gold. Obviously, it's not a traditional burnt umber, but it's just such a pretty brown. I wanted to include it as a convenience brown. I do also have traditional burnt umber, which is PBR7 by Daniel Smith, followed up by Burnt Sienna, also PBR7 from Daniel Smith as well. Now, the next color is kind of, a lot of people would have either or. You'd either have Burnt Sienna or transparent red iron oxide, but I really like them both, and I feel like they mix differently, so I included both on my palette. This one is from M. Graham. It's more transparent than the Burnt Sienna and granulates a little bit less and has a little bit more of an orangey undertone. Then we have Quinacridone Burnt Orange by Daniel Smith. This is one of my favorite colors, but I hardly had any of it left, and my local art store was out, so I'll have to go back and get some more. Followed by the True Quinacridone Gold P049 from Daniel Smith. Finally, I have Yellow Ochre here. Now, I have Daniel Smith's PY43, and this is a really transparent color. I know a lot of people don't like Yellow Ochre because they think it muddies their work, but this color is absolutely gorgeous and transparent and mixes just fine. Now, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the paint tubes that lost their lives in the filming of this video. Here I have the sole survivors of this palette creation, and I'd just like to take a moment of silence for all of those tubes that are no longer with us. Again, I mentioned that these wells are just huge, between 8 and 10 milliliter capacity, so I definitely would make sure you have enough paints if you are looking to add this palette to your collection. That being said, I don't think I'll have to refill many of these wells for quite some time. I think they'll last a good long while. The hard part is going to be waiting long enough for them to dry before I dive into them to use them. Now, the last step that I did when setting up this palette is that I wanted to make sure I labeled all of my paints. I'm pretty familiar with all of them, but just for some reason, if I'm having a brain fart and can't remember which color goes where, I wanted to make these labels. So here you have me using the plastic lid of the palette, and I marked it with a little Sharpie where the palette wells measured out so that I would know where to write the paints. And then I filled it out with the names of the paints, the pigments, and the brand of each paint, and I'm adhering that to the side of the palette. This is painter's tape. It's just white painter's tape, so it's adhesive but not overly sticky, and I'll be able to switch it out a lot more easily. You could use masking tape as well, but just be aware that that might be a little harder to take off. So in this last little bit of the video, I wanted to show you some of the beauties of a porcelain palette. If you haven't used them already before and maybe aren't as familiar with them, they are really known for their ability to let the watercolors shine on their own when you're mixing them, and that's for 2 reasons. The first reason is that when you put out a swatch of color, like I'm doing here with the Amazonite Genuine and Turner Turquoise mixture here, they don't beat up. And eventually plastic palettes and metal palettes will kind of lose some of that beading quality and will let you do flatter washes, but porcelain palettes will let you do it from the get-go, and you can see the whole transparency of the pigment, and you can see the color that it's going to be when it hits your paper. So I really enjoy that. Now, I also wanted to show you a staining color. So I'm using Phthalo Blue, and this is the second reason that I was so excited to be able to use a porcelain palette. Phthalo Blue as a staining color will immediately stain plastic and metal palettes. Like, that's just the nature of staining colors. They're very intense and very hard to remove. However, you're going to see here, I'm going to use just a tissue and I can wipe clean that palette in one stroke, and I can clear the entire amount of phthalo blue from my palette immediately, and it will never ever stain. Like that's a huge benefit to this type of palette. So I will be able to mix, remix, clean off, mix again, and never have to worry about not being able to see my true colors because the plastic underneath is stained. Alright, so here's the photo of all of the paints and their swatches that I used in creating this palette. I did try and include a slide. I know a lot of you ask for a list of the pigments. I typed them all out, I had them on a slide, and my software ate it. So I am very sorry. I don't have the stamina to type out another full list of 30 paints and the brands, but hopefully you will enjoy looking at this photo. You can pause the frame and try and open it full screen so you can get all the brand names, or if you're a patron over on my Patreon page, all of my patrons have access to a blog post that will have a complete list of these pigments on them. I want to say thanks again to Alan for sending this palette. I cannot wait to use this palette on my first full-size painting. I'm going to have this palette for years and years and years to come, and hopefully it will be the last studio palette I ever have to set up. I want to also thank my patrons over on Patreon, especially to my producers, Paul, Chris, Victor, and Michelle. And that'll do it for this video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time.